There's a civilization that modern culture romanticizes as the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and civilization itself. We imagine marble temples, wise philosophers, and noble warriors. The reality would kill you in 24 hours. In 430 BC, Athens, the most advanced city in the ancient world, suffered a plague that killed 100,000 people in 4 years. 1 in 3 residents died. The disease caused fever so intense that victims threw themselves into wells trying to cool down. Bodies piled in the streets because there weren't enough living people to bury the dead. The city that invented democracy couldn't invent basic sanitation. In 416 BC, Athenian soldiers arrived at the island of Melis and demanded surrender. The Melians refused. The Athenians killed every adult male, enslaved every woman and child, and repopulated the island with Athenian colonists. This wasn't war, it was genocide. And Athens, the cradle of Western philosophy, did it because they could. In 399 BC, Athens, the city that gave the world Socrates, executed him for corrupting the youth by making them think critically. They forced him to drink poison hemlock. His crime was asking questions. The civilization that modern culture celebrates for intellectual achievement killed its greatest philosopher for being too intellectual. But here's what should terrify anyone who fantasizes about time traveling to ancient Greece. The marble temples were covered in garish paint. The philosophers you admire owned slaves who they beat regularly. The democracy you celebrate only applied to 10% of the population. And the food, water, medicine, and hygiene were so primitive that your modern immune system would fail within hours of arrival. This is why you wouldn't survive one day in ancient Greece. What would actually kill you, and why the civilization we idealize was actually a nightmare of violence, disease, and casual cruelty that would destroy everything you think you know about human dignity. Hour 1. The water you drink will poison you. You wake up in Athens, 430 BC. It's 6 a.m. and you're thirsty. You need water. This is where your death begins. Ancient Athens had no water treatment. The city's water supply came from wells, springs, and the Ilissos River. All of it was contaminated with human waste, animal waste, and decomposing organic matter. There were no sewers. People dumped chamber pots into the streets. Rain washed waste into the groundwater. Every water source was a bacterial breeding ground. But here's what makes it fatal for you. Ancient Greeks had been drinking this water their entire lives. Their immune systems had adapted to constant exposure to E. coli, Giardia, dysentery, and typhoid. They still got sick regularly. Diarrheal diseases killed thousands every year, but they had some resistance. You have zero resistance. Your immune system has been protected by modern water treatment your entire life. You've never been exposed to the bacterial load that ancient water contained. 1 cup of Athenian well water would introduce pathogens your body has no defense against. Within 2 hours of drinking, the diarrhea starts. Within 4 hours, you're vomiting. Within 6 hours, you're severely dehydrated. And here's the catastrophic problem. There's no clean water to rehydrate with. Every water source is equally contaminated. Drinking more water just introduces more bacteria. You're trapped in a cycle of contamination and dehydration. Modern medicine could save you with IV fluids and antibiotics. No understanding of water contamination. Their medicine is based on balancing humors. They would diagnose your diarrhea as excess black bile and try to fix it by making you vomit more. By hour 12, you're dangerously dehydrated. By hour 18, you're delirious. Hour 3. The food you eat is toxic. You're already sick from the water, but you're also hungry. You need food. This makes everything worse. Ancient Greek food was preserved without refrigeration, oil, and sun-drying to prevent spoilage. Food regularly contained dangerous levels of bacteria, parasites, and mold. The Greeks ate it anyway because they had no choice. The bread, the staple of the Greek diet, would make you violently ill. It was made from barley or wheat ground in stone mills. The grinding process introduced stone particles into the flour. Eating bread meant eating tiny rocks. Ancient Greek skeletons show extreme tooth wear from grinding down on stone particles in every meal. But the real danger was ergot. This is a fungus that grows on grain, especially in wet conditions. Ergot contains alkaloids that cause hallucinations, seizures, gangrene, and death. Ancient Greeks called it sacred disease and thought victims were possessed by gods. They were actually being poisoned by contaminated grain. The meat was even worse. With no refrigeration, meat spoiled within hours of slaughter. The Greeks masked spoilage with heavy spices and fermentation, but masking the taste didn't eliminate the bacteria. Salmonella, Listeria, and Staphylococcus were in nearly every meat product. And then there were the parasites. Ancient Greeks had constant intestinal worm infections from undercooked meat and contaminated water. Tapeworms, roundworms, and flukes were so common they were considered normal. By hour 6, you're experiencing food poisoning on top of waterborne illness. Your body is purging from both ends. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them. And every attempt to eat or drink introduces more pathogens. You're trapped in a cascade of contamination that your body can't fight. Hour 5. The air you breathe is killing you. You're now severely ill. But even breathing is dangerous in ancient Athens. The city had no sanitation infrastructure. Human waste was thrown into the streets. Animal carcasses rotted where they fell. Garbage accumulated in massive piles. During summer, temperatures reached 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius. The city was a furnace filled with decomposing organic matter. The smell would be unbearable, not just unpleasant, physically overwhelming. The air was thick with hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and methane from decomposing waste. Modern people who work in sewers use respirators to avoid these gases. You would be breathing them continuously. But it's not just the smell. The air was full of pathogens. Tuberculosis was endemic. 1 in 7 Greeks died from TB. It spread through respiratory droplets in crowded spaces. The Agora marketplace was packed with thousands of people, many of them coughing and expelling TB bacteria into the air you're breathing. Typhus spread through lice, which were ubiquitous. Everyone had lice. The Greeks considered them an unavoidable nuisance. The lice carried rickettsia bacteria that caused typhus fever, 40% mortality rate without modern antibiotics, which wouldn't exist for another 2,400 years. And then there was lead poisoning. The Greeks used lead extensively. Lead pipes for water systems, lead-lined vessels for wine, lead-based cosmetics and medicines. They were being slowly poisoned their entire lives. Chronic lead exposure causes cognitive decline, kidney damage, and death. You would be ingesting lead from water, wine, and possibly medicine if anyone tried to treat your illness. By hour 8, your respiratory system is under assault. The contaminated air is introducing pathogens. The decomposition gases are irritating your lungs. Your body is fighting infections from water, food, and now air. Your immune system is overwhelmed. Hour 7. The medicine will finish you off. By now you're desperately ill. Someone notices and decides to help. This is when things get truly horrific. Ancient Greek medicine was based on the theory of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was believed to result from imbalances in these humors. Treatment involved rebalancing them through bleeding, purging, vomiting, and sweating. A toxic plant that causes violent vomiting, diarrhea, and cardiac arrhythmia. They're trying to help. They're actually accelerating your death. If vomiting doesn't work, they move to bloodletting. The theory is that you have excess blood causing fever. They would cut open a vein and drain a pint or more of blood. You're already in hypovolemic shock from dehydration. Removing blood would push you into complete circulatory collapse. But wait, there's more. Greek physicians also used cauterization, burning flesh with hot metal to seal in vapors and restore balance. They would burn your skin while you're dying of dehydration and infection. The burns would introduce more bacteria and increase your fluid loss. The medications were poisons: mercury for skin conditions, arsenic for parasites, opium for pain. The only thing they got right, but it would suppress your already failing respiratory system. You've lost blood through therapeutic bleeding. You've been given toxic substances that your liver and kidneys, already failing from dehydration and infection, can't process. The help is killing you faster than the disease. Hour 9. You can't escape. Because you're not a citizen. Let's say you somehow survive the water, food, air, and medicine. You're still not safe because you have no legal protection. Ancient Athenian democracy was for citizens only. Citizens were adult males born to Athenian parents. That was about 30,000 people out of a population of 300,000. That's 10%. Everyone else, women, foreigners, slaves, had no political rights and limited legal protection. You're not a citizen. You appeared mysteriously in Athens with no family connections, no citizenship papers, no property. You're automatically classified as a foreigner, medic, at best, or a runaway slave at worst. As a non-citizen, you can be enslaved on the spot. If someone claims you're their escaped slave, you have no legal recourse. There's no presumption of innocence, no trial, no due process. But here's what makes it truly nightmarish. Slavery in ancient Greece was brutal. Slaves were property with no rights. Owners could beat, torture, or kill them without legal consequence. Slaves worked in silver mines at Laurion, where life expectancy was measured in months. They were worked to death in total darkness, chained in tunnels, breathing toxic fumes from smelting operations. You'd face constant violence. Ancient Athens was not safe. Murder was common. Theft was constant. There was no professional police force. Justice was administered by citizens who voted on guilt or innocence after hearing arguments. If you were victimized, your only recourse was convincing citizens to care, which they wouldn't, because you're not one of them. By hour 12, you realize there's no escape. You're trapped in a city that's poisoning you, with no legal protection, no modern medicine, and no way to leave. The walls that kept invaders out also keep you in. Hour 13. The social norms will break you mentally. Even if your body somehow survived, the culture would destroy your mind. Slavery was ubiquitous and unquestioned. 1/3 of Athens' population was enslaved. These weren't prisoners of war exclusively. They were people bought, sold, and bred like livestock. Families were separated. Children were taken from mothers. Humans were property, and everyone accepted this as normal. The philosophers you admire owned slaves. Aristotle wrote that some people are natural slaves who are better off being owned. Plato's ideal republic included a slave class. These were the great minds of Athens, and they considered slavery a natural and necessary institution. Women had no rights. They couldn't vote, own property, or appear in public without male supervision. Respectable women stayed in the home. Women who appeared in public alone were assumed to be prostitutes. Even the most intelligent, capable woman in Athens had fewer rights than the dumbest male citizen. Child marriage was normal. Girls were married at 13 out of 15 to men in their 30s. This wasn't scandalous. It was expected. The wedding night would be considered rape by modern standards. Ancient Greeks saw it as a man claiming his property. Homosexuality was accepted, but only in the most disturbing context. Adult men sexually pursued teenage boys, 12, 17, in a practice called pederasty. This was considered educational. The man was the erast's lover. The boy was the eromenos beloved. Relationships that would result in prison sentences today were celebrated as culturally enriching. And the violence was constant and casual. Athens executed people for religious impiety. Sparta threw disabled infants off cliffs. Armies massacred entire cities. Slavery, rape, child abuse, and genocide were everyday occurrences that people didn't question. By hour 15, the cognitive dissonance would be shattering. You grew up believing ancient Greece was the birthplace of civilization, reason, and human dignity. Instead, you're watching humans treat other humans as disposable objects. The culture that gave us philosophy and democracy is built on slavery, misogyny, and brutality. Everything you believed about the glory of Greece is revealed as a lie. Hour 17. You're dying and no one cares. By now you're in the final stages of multiple organ failure. You're lying in the street because you collapsed from dehydration, infection, and malnutrition. People walk past you without stopping. Ancient Greeks had no concept of universal human dignity. Charity was not a virtue. Compassion for strangers was not expected. Then slaves would drag your corpse to a mass grave outside the city walls. There were no hospitals, no emergency services, no ambulances, no social safety net. If you were sick and had no family to care for you, you died alone. And since you're a foreigner with no connections, you have no family in Athens. The temple of Asclepius, the healing god, wouldn't help you. Temple healing required payment and sacrifices. You have no animals to sacrifice. Temple healing was prayer-based. They would pray to Asclepius to cure you while you died of bacterial infections that prayer cannot treat. By hour 20, you're unconscious. Your body has given up. Your brain is shutting down from dehydration and hypoxia. You're dying in the street of the most advanced city in the ancient world, and no one is coming to help. You're dead. Cause of death: waterborne bacterial infection, food poisoning, respiratory infection, dehydration, and medical malpractice. Contributing factors: lack of sanitation, contaminated food supply, toxic air quality, and complete absence of effective medicine. Your body will lie in the street until slaves remove it. You'll be dumped in a mass grave with other foreigners, criminals, and slaves. No marker, no record. No one will remember you were ever there. Why we get ancient Greece so wrong. Here's what modern culture doesn't tell you about ancient Greece. The marble temples were garishly painted in bright reds, blues, and yellows. They looked like children's toys, not the austere white monuments we imagine. The democracy we celebrate excluded 90% of the population. The philosophy we admire was developed by slave owners who believed slavery was natural. The culture that gave us logic and reason also gave us sacred prostitution. 15th century Europeans rediscovered Greek texts and projected their own ideals onto ancient culture. They imagined noble philosophers in white robes debating ethics in marble academies. The reality was sweaty men in colorful tunics arguing in crowded, filthy streets, while slaves carried their belongings and emptied their chamber pots. The sanitation was worse than medieval Europe. At least medieval cities eventually developed some waste management. Ancient Athens just let it accumulate. The streets were open sewers. Disease was rampant. The plague of 430 BC killed 1/3 of the population because they had no understanding of contagion. The violence was worse than anything in modern warfare. Modern armies have rules of engagement and try to minimize civilian casualties, at least officially. Ancient Greeks didn't even have the concept. Slavery of prisoners was expected. Rape was considered spoils of war. The medicine was actively harmful. Medieval medicine was bad. Ancient Greek medicine was worse. At least medieval doctors sometimes accidentally helped patients. Greek doctors consistently made things worse with bloodletting, purging, and toxic medications. And the social structure was fundamentally incompatible with modern values. We believe in human rights, equality, and individual dignity. Ancient Greeks believed in hierarchy. Your modern morality would be incomprehensible to them. The brutal truth about classical civilization: you wouldn't survive one day in ancient Greece. Not metaphorically, literally. The water would poison you. The food would sicken you. The air would infect you, the medicine would kill you, and the society wouldn't care. The marble temples were surrounded by shit in the streets. The philosophers owned human beings. The democracy was built on slavery. The culture that gave us logic and reason failed to develop basic sanitation, refused to grant rights to most of its population, and casually committed atrocities that would be considered war crimes today. Every system was designed to fail you. No safe food, no effective medicine, no legal protection, no social safety net, no human rights. You would be poisoned, infected, possibly enslaved, and definitely dead within 24 hours. And here's the most disturbing part. This was the most advanced civilization of its time. Athens in 430 BC was the pinnacle of human achievement. The smartest people alive, the most sophisticated government, the most advanced architecture and art. And it was still a death trap of disease, violence, and brutality. The past wasn't romantic. It was horrific. Life expectancy in ancient Greece was 35 years. Infant mortality was 30 to 40%. 1 in 3 children died before age 5. Women died in childbirth regularly. Infections that modern antibiotics cure in days killed people in weeks. You romanticize ancient Greece because you've never experienced what it was actually like. You imagine philosophical debates in beautiful temples. The reality was arguing in hot, crowded, filthy streets while dying of dysentery. You imagine brave warriors fighting for democracy. The reality was slave soldiers dying for an oligarchy that called itself democracy while excluding 90% of people from political participation. Modern life is a miracle. Clean water from taps, safe food from stores, medicine that actually works, legal rights protected by government, social safety nets for the vulnerable. None of this existed in ancient Greece. None of this would exist for another 2,000 plus years. You wouldn't survive one day in ancient Greece because ancient Greece was barely survivable for ancient Greeks. The people who lived there died young from diseases we've eliminated. They watched their children die from infections we cure with cheap antibiotics. They drank water that would hospitalize you. They ate food that would poison you. They breathed air that would sicken you. The past wasn't better. It was worse. Much, much worse. And ancient Greece, the civilization we celebrate as the foundation of Western culture, would kill you before sunset on your first day. That's not nostalgia. That's not romance. That's just the brutal, inescapable reality of life before modern sanitation, medicine, and human rights. You wouldn't survive because humans barely survived. Painful, disease-ridden lives that modern people would consider unendurable. So the next time someone romanticizes ancient Greece, remember they're romanticizing a place where drinking water would kill you in 24 hours, where the philosophers owned slaves, where democracy meant rule by 10% of the population, where medicine was bloodletting and toxic herbs, where children were married at 13 and disabled infants were murdered. You wouldn't survive one day, and you should be grateful you'll never have to try.